So tonight, I had the opportunity, the blessing of being able to talk about the God of Jacob. As Jacob is laying on his deathbed, he enacts this covenant adoption ceremony that he really pulls together for his grandsons, Joseph's sons, who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, Ephraim and Manasseh. And as Jacob really is on his deathbed with one of his last um, acts of faith and with his last bit of energy, he sits up on his deathbed and he enacts this formal adoption ceremony because he wants his grandsons who had been born in Egypt and who had always come up in Egypt and who had been identified with Egypt to actually be identified with the people of God and to really receive the inheritance of the people of God and to be connected with the people of God. And so he wants to adopt them so that they will have the blessing that is on his life come down to them. And one of the things that he really seeks to help them to know in doing this is that the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob is far more precious than anything that they could ever have in Egypt. And the inheritance of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob is far more precious than anything they could have ever had in Egypt. As Joseph's sons, they would have been born to a high-ranking politician, and they would have had access to the best that Egypt had to offer. They would have had access to wealth and status and celebrity. But you know, Jacob wants them to be identified as his sons because he wants them to have access to identity as the people of God, to the kind of inheritance that never passes away. You know, there are people in our world that run after the fleeting things of this world. They run after money, they run after pleasure, they run after status and fame and education and these things that the world has to offer. And it's not that these things are bad things. It's just that these things are temporary things. And the Lord holds out for us, the people of God, a far greater inheritance, an inheritance that will never pass away. Being joined to Jesus is far more precious than anything that we could ever possess in this world. And having Jesus in our life is far more precious than anything that we could ever possess in this world. Another thing that the Lord that Jacob wants to share with his grandsons is that the God of Israel is a sufficient God. And so he thinks back on his life and he talks about how the God of Israel came to him when he was at Luz. And the Lord made these promises to him. You know, Luz was a place that came to later be known as Bethel. And Jacob thinks back on his most desperate, difficult part of his life, the part where he was running away from his brother Esau. He was without the material resources of life. He didn't have really a dollar or dime to his name. And he'd gone to this pagan city, Luz, to try to seek shelter. And they essentially he couldn't find a place to anybody to take him in, and so he found himself sleeping under the stars with only a rock to lay his head on. But it was in that situation of desperation, a situation where Jacob didn't have anything and he was without, that the God of Israel, El Shaddai, came to him and gave him a great vision and gave to him precious promises. And one of the most important things about that promise that God gave him was that God promised to be with him wherever he would go. And so as an old man, Jacob looks back on that and he's really sharing the fact that El Shaddai had been with him through thick and thin, through ups and downs, through the difficulties of life. And so God, having him as our God, is more precious than anything this world could ever offer, because God will be with us when other people forsake us. God will be with us no matter where we find ourselves. If our mother and our father forsake us, the Lord will take us up. The Lord is the one that's made those promises that he will never leave us and he will never forsake us. And so, what a wonderful thing. God has revealed himself as Emmanuel, God with us, letting us know that he is the God that is sufficient for us, the God that will always be with us to carry us through difficult times and no matter what time we are facing. And people need a God like that today. My question is Who wouldn't serve a God like that? A God who promises to give himself to us and to be with us always. So the final thing that we uh, learn tonight about God and his character is that God is a surprisingly good God. He's a surprisingly good God. What Jacob says to Joseph and to Ephraim and Manasseh is he says to Joseph, I never thought that I would see your face again. I never thought that I would see you alive again. And here the Lord has allowed me to see your offspring also. What Jacob is saying is that God has done far more for me than I could have ever imagined or thought. God has been kinder to me, more merciful to me than I could have ever realized, and that is the truth about our God. That is His character. God always exceeds our expectations in terms of His kindness. He has given to us the greatest gift, His only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, who came and laid down His life for us. And that was an expression of not just grace, but amazing grace. Grace that shocks, grace that astounds, grace that surprises. And as we think about our lives, we can say that God has not just been good to each and every one of us who have been walking with the Lord, but God has been shockingly good, surprisingly good, abundantly good. God has done far more than we could ever imagine or think in our lives. And we ought to give God the praise for that. We ought to live lives of great gratitude and joy for that when we realize that God is as generous as He is. And so I would encourage you today. I would encourage you to seek to serve this God, to seek to worship this God, to seek to know this God. The God who is precious, more precious than anything that this world could ever offer. The God who is sufficient, who is more than capable of meeting our need and satisfying our need. And the God who is surprisingly good. Amen.